On today's episode, I'm joined by JD Young from Locked On Sharks to debate which of our two franchises will make the Stanley Cup Playoffs first.
You're Locked On Blackhawks, your daily podcast on the Chicago Blackhawks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Real quick, just a reminder that today's episode is sponsored by Game Time. Be sure to go and download the Game Time app right now, and when you do, use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps. That way you can get $20 off to the sporting events, concerts, or theater events near you. As always, I'm Jack Bushman, as I'm sure you all know by now. For those who are watching on YouTube, JD Young from Locked On Sharks is here to discuss both of our teams having a pretty eventful offseason. JD, as I mentioned before jumping on air, I believe the last time we talked was just prior to the NHL Draft, and a lot has been going on since then, so certainly excited to dive into how it was hearing Macklin Celebrini's name finally get called, and also some of the other notable moves that the San Jose Sharks have made here this offseason. But before we get into that, JD, gotta ask, how's the offseason been treating you, my friend? We're in the latter stages of August now, so we're only a couple of weeks away from training camp being opened up. Some actual concrete on ice news to talk about is always, a little preferable for us hosts here. But how's the offseason been treating you, my friend?
It has been an excellent offseason. My career has delivered time and time and again. So, but yeah, it's been good. Have one last kind of trip planned for next week, going to Disneyland with the kids. But yeah, I'm actually looking forward to a shark season for the first time in a long, long time.
I'm pretty much in the same boat. I got some, I don't want to say high hopes for the Blackhawks, but I really feel like this team is
slightly raised expectations.
Yes. Go in the right direction is the biggest thing. And it looks like both of our franchises are on the right track to do that this season, JD. But before we get into kind of the vibes of the San Jose Sharks team that they're going to put on the ice this year, got to start with the 2024 NHL Draft. We knew Macklin Celebrini for a long, long time, even before the Sharks won the lottery, that his name was going to get called first. But for the day to finally arrive, I know how it was when Connor Bedard got selected number 1 overall, but you were there in person to hear the San Jose Sharks select Macklin Celebrini first overall. So I'm sure it hit extra hard. Just let me know your feelings and the emotions of what that day and what that experience was like, and finally hearing Macklin's name called.
Yeah, I mean, there was definite excitement, and especially in Vegas, right? We know the Sharks-Vegas rivalry basically since Vegas came into the league, and that rivalry has been very heated, when it first started. But I've seen a lot of Sharks fans in Vegas. You've seen kind of the Celebrini jerseys already. It was really fun experience, and then actually having Jumbo Joe Thornton out there, a former first overall pick himself, kind of almost handing the franchise, ceremoniously handing the franchise over to Macklin Celebrini. It was such a great moment. It was also a whirlwind because, after that pick, there's just so much stuff that has to, work-wise, has to go on. Even though we knew it was going to be Celebrini for months, or I guess 2 months, but still, just it was fun to enjoy it. You kind of take a little deep breath, and then it was okay, let's get to work here. And I think that's kind of the way Celebrini is too. He mentioned he cut his Vegas trip short so he can get to the Bay Area to get a skate in on Sunday. This kid is just wired kind of differently of he knows exactly what he wants to do and how he's going to do it and what he's going to do. So, but yeah, hearing his name and just you've kind of waited all season and we're hoping to be there and hear it. It was a great feeling, and one that I will remember hopefully for a long, long time.
Well, I'm very happy that you got to experience that in person, JD. But I know the whirlwind of the quick turnarounds of having to also be a fan while also working the draft at the same time. You want to fully take it in, but things go by so fast, and you're also trying to stay on top of the next picks. And both of our teams had quite a few selections. Well, San Jose selected 33rd, technically the first pick in the second round, but a handful of picks early on in the draft. So it was a quick turnaround, quicker than it was for me, than it was for you, because not only was San Jose on the clock at number 1, landing Celebrini, and we will touch more on him in just a moment, JD. It can't leave out Macklin Celebrini, but they were also back on the clock at number 11, which led to them selecting big left-handed defenseman Sam Dickinson, who I firmly believed was going to go inside the top 10. I also believe the guy who was available there and ended up getting selected at number 12, Zeev Buium, was going to get selected in the top 10 as well. I know when we spoke prior to the draft, JD, Zeev Buium was someone who we both really raved about, and had our teams been in other situations besides 1 and 2, like that really would have been a guy both of our franchises would have loved to have selected. And San Jose probably didn't figure maybe that Zeev was going to be on the clock, but they probably felt that way about Sam Dickinson as well. They ultimately end up selecting Sam. Kind of take me through your feelings on that selection and going with Sam Dickinson over Zeev Buium.
Yeah, I mean, I actually asked Mike Greer that night, like, were you surprised that Sam Dickinson was still available? And he said, like, yeah, I was surprised. Especially with a guy like that prototypical size, the way he moves with the puck. And I know it's going to be a big debate among Sharks fans of the Buium versus Dickinson, but I see like what Mike Greer is trying to do here. And it feels like Dickinson has a much kind of safer floor. Maybe the offensive ceiling isn't quite as high as Zeev Buium is with Dickinson, but I think he has the tools to be a better two-way defender between the two. And I think for the Sharks, right, you hit a home run with Celebrini. It feels like, I don't want to say a safer pick, but it feels like Dickinson at the worst he's going to be a really, really solid second pairing defenseman, but has the upside to be a top pairing defenseman for San Jose. So yeah, it's going to be one that we, 5-10 years, we look back on and see if it was the right decision. But I understand my career's reasoning, and especially with the Sharks needing just kind of that elite talent on the blue line, I can see why they went Dickinson over Buium there.
Yeah, I understand it, and mostly
it's just not as fun.
it's certainly not as fun. And while you may sacrifice a little bit of upside, Sam Dickinson absolutely has a high ceiling of his own, right? And as you kind of alluded to, with his size and his defensive capabilities, and I mean, just look at teams that win the Stanley Cup over the last half decade, right? You got big bodies on your back end, and that's something we've actually seen. Blackhawks general manager Kyle Davidson he's gone with that method the last handful of years in NHL Draft. So, I mean, you can make an argument either way, but in terms of a floor, it does feel like if you were going to ask me right here, right now, who's going to be the safer player in their own end, I'd take Sam Dickinson because of his size and physicality. But as you mentioned, going to be one of those draft orders that we're going to be looking back at for years to come. Will be fun watching both of those players develop over the next handful of seasons. Also got to ask about getting Igor Chernyshov at number 33, because I think most scouts, analysts, and probably people who were covering the draft working for the Locked On NHL Network assumed that he was going to wind up getting selected in the first round. JD, to come away with Macklin Celebrini, Sam Dickinson, and Igor Chernyshov in the top 33, you had to be absolutely ecstatic, right?
Yeah, Chernyshov. So there was a lot of questions like, why did he fall? Well, I think we found out he ended up having shoulder surgery that's going to knock him out for the first half of the season here. So I think that might be the reason why he fell. But Chernyshov, who is one of those guys who I think can develop his game to no matter who is like the play style. We saw in the VHL, the Russian Junior League, where he would just light up opponents and just dangle around and has a beautiful shot. But then the very interesting and kind of mature thing from him is playing in the KHL as an 18-year-old kid, playing fourth line minutes, right? You see a lot of these times, like where, especially young kids, where they're not used to kind of that style game. He was able to turn into like a, forechecking monster where it's like, I'm going to do whatever I can to kind of help out the team here and kind of play that physical, kind of gritty, dirty game. And watching his tape, like, more often than not, he would leave his team in a better situation than when he got on the ice. Like if he's starting in the defensive zone, by the time his shift is over, his team's got the puck in the offensive zone, kind of doing positive things. So I think his development this year is going to be a little interesting because of the injury. He is making, he also transferred over to the CHL, where he's going to be playing with the Saginaw Spirit this year, the defending Memorial Cup champions. But I think they're probably going to like slow roll him into it and kind of get him geared up. That way they can make a run for a defending championship, and getting to play with Zane Parekh, not a bad start to your career as well. So yeah, I think for him, it's he's got a nice foundation for what he did in Russia. But I think going and playing the CHL to maybe continue to grow his offensive game, it's pretty solid development path for him. So
yeah, it was a really spectacular first, I mean, all in all, a 2024 NHL draft for the San Jose Sharks. But I feel like the high vibes didn't stop for Mike Grier and the Sharks fans. The most notable move, other than the draft and landing Macklin Celebrini first overall, has to be getting former Nashville Predators goaltender Yaroslav Askarov, who's been highly considered to be one of, if not the best goaltender prospect in the world, landing him from the Predators couple of weeks ago, probably not even a couple of weeks ago.
Last week.
Yeah, last week. I mean, stuff just there's been news left and right. It's hard to keep up with the dates and the timing of all of it, but it's still, I'm sure, semi-fresh, and I've seen your posts still over the moon that Yaroslav Askarov is a member of the San Jose Sharks. Tell me your thoughts about acquiring him, the deal, what the San Jose Sharks gave up, and what this really means for this organization moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, the Sharks have definitely struggled to draft and develop goaltending. You have to look back all the way to Nabokov was the last time they really drafted and developed a goaltender. Martin Jones, who was drafted by the Kings, and then the Sharks traded for him via the Boston Bruins. They've kind of wandered the desert the past couple seasons looking for goalies, and really struggled with it. But Askarov, I think, really kind of puts a nice bow on this foundation for the Sharks rebuild, right? And everybody kind of all lines up now, right? You have Macklin Celebrini, you have Will Smith, who are going to make their NHL debuts this year. Dickinson's probably a year or two away before he's going to be playing in the NHL. But Askarov, who's going to be playing NHL games this year and probably going to start to come into his own over the next 2 to 3 years, everything just really kind of coming together on the same timeline. And I think that's the important thing, right? You see so many rebuilds where things just don't line up right. Look at the Sabres, for example, right? They focus on their front end, but then the back end was messed up, and then they've drafted a bunch of defenders, right? And now their forward group is still a little bit. I think everything's really kind of coming together on the same timeline. And I know the price feels a little steep, right? Giving away a unprotected, or I guess it's a top 10 protected 2025 Vegas pick now, which you can kind of decide if Vegas truly bottoms out and the Sharks surprise people, you can make a decision between there, and then giving up a prospect in David Edstrom. It can feel a little steep, but you weren't going to get a goalie of Askarov's caliber with that pick if you wanted to go goalie in that situation. And David Edstrom was probably going to be the 4th C in the Sharks lineup, especially with Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, and Philip Beeson, who they drafted in the 2022 draft. Edstrom was kind of, 4C, but you can find 4C guys off the street. Like that's not the hardest position in the world to replace. So I think for the Sharks to kind of really solve that question of who's the goalie of the future, it's been a question that's been over the franchise basically since Martin Jones turned into a pumpkin.
And quite honestly, JD, my reaction when I broke down this trade on my show, because when a prospect like Yaroslav Askarov is on the market, I think I'd be doing my fan base disservice if I didn't at least talk about the Blackhawks having a possibility there, which I never expected it to be likely. But when just reacting to that move, quite honestly, looking at what San Jose has in their prospect pool and in terms of draft capital, they're not absolutely loaded with capital, but they didn't really sell out. And I feel like they didn't have to give up any of their truly high-end prospects, right? Like, it's a deal to get Yaroslav Askarov that I'd make 10 times out of 10. So I certainly didn't bat an eye at the price, and, we'll see what winds up happening with that conditional first. But at the end of the day, like you mentioned, it's been a struggle for San Jose to get this caliber goaltender in their organization, and they had a chance to. You got to absolutely go for it. So I certainly respect it and had no problems with what they gave up. Last question I have for you, JD. We'll be talking long-term picture for both of our organizations during segment 3, but I do kind of want to get the vibe on the San Jose Sharks team for for this season? We know Macklin Celebrini is going to be there. Kind of tell me about what your expectations are for the Sharks team this season and what you're at least hoping to see from this team moving forward.
I think again, it's this team's still going to be bad, right? They're going to lose a bunch of games this year, but can you just start to? You're kind of trying to raise the Titanic here and just be like competent most nights. I think it's a big thing, right? Not so many of the like 10-2 losses that we saw, or the 7-1 type of losses, and just be a more competitive team night in and night out, and give your young guys some room to grow and develop and put them in the best position to succeed. And I think the Sharks have went out of their way to do that with some of the moves that they made this offseason and, to kind of help protect themselves. I think that was a big problem with last year. You went to the year expecting to have Tomas Hertl, Logan Couture, Mikael Granlund, and then Nico Sturm as your, kind of down the middle. Not the worst center group in the world. Those guys played 0 games together because of injuries or trades or whatever. And I think the Sharks have done a much better job of kind of protecting themselves in case of injuries or in case guys are hurt or aren't, or once trades happen, because this team is still going to be selling off pieces going into the trade deadline. I think they've done a much kind of better job of that and putting that way. Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini aren't having to kind of carry the load by themselves. And a guy like William Eklund, who I thought had a really solid first season, he can continue his growth and development because he's not having to play with a guy like Luke Cunningham for 30 games of the season as his center. So second line center Luke Cunningham, that was a thing. So yeah, I think the Sharks have really done a good job of setting themselves up for at least to be a more competent night in, night out.
Hey, we had top line Ryan Donato last year on opening night of the 2023-2024 NHL season.
Sharks legend Ryan Donato. Yes.
So it's kind of funny, JD, whenever we have these conversations, I find it so funny how there are so many similarities between these two franchises. And I feel like we're going to find more as we continue talking here on today's episode. Coming up in just a moment, don't go anywhere because I'll be turning it over to JD to ask some Blackhawks related questions during segment 2 before breaking down which of our two franchises will make the Stanley Cup playoffs first. First, real quick, though, I got to let you all know about Game Time. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to the next ball game or major event that you want to attend. And I'm here happy to announce that Game Time is an official authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes buying tickets both easier and faster. Plus, prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer that it gets to the first pitch. And I just bought Cubs tickets a weekend ago, 25 minutes after the game started, because the prices were so cheap. I had a couple of buddies who are already in attendance, and I thought, hey, why not? It's only going to cost me a few bucks. I highly recommend you all go and download the Game Time app yourself because they have killer last minute deals, all in prices, and their lowest price guarantee, which helps take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. And they also provide seats from every house in the ballpark, so you know exactly what to expect when you're arriving, plus last minute deals, flash deals, and zone deals that help you find and buy MLB tickets in an instant. So again, make sure to go and download the Game Time app right now. And when you do, use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps to get $20 off with your first purchase. For folks in the Chicagoland area, you can go on down to Wrigley Field before the temperatures start to drop here as we're creeping into September, and you'll get $20 off if you download Game Time and use the promo code LOCKEDONNHL in all caps. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Game Time. Whoop, apologies here. Gotta take that off. But JD, while I'm going through a little bit of difficulties here, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask some Blackhawks related questions, because I don't know if it's been quite the offseason that San Jose had, but it's been a pretty notable one for the Blackhawks as well. And as you were kind of alluding to with San Jose, it feels like their front office has done a better job of surrounding this team and giving them options should injury or should they have to weigh on the rookies a little bit more. There's more help alongside them than last year. The Blackhawks know all about that, JD. They were absolutely derailed by injuries last year. And that leads to a lot of new members of this Blackhawks team this year. So turn it over to you. The floor is open. What Blackhawks questions you got for me, my friend?
I think let's start with a guy who was a Blackhawk, but wasn't really there last season because he got hurt like the first game of the year or the first week of the season. That's Taylor Hall, who, of course, signed a 2-year deal, $6 million a piece, was supposed to be kind of Connor Bedard's running mate. So is this season, are the expectations for him to kind of take that role of being that maybe the Robin to Connor Bedard's Batman here?
Yeah, I would really love to see a JD, and it was so unfortunate that Taylor Hall got hurt so early in the season. It was going to be a really good opportunity for him, right? A chance to prove that he can still be a top line, top 6 type of forward at this level after kind of being demoted on the Boston Bruins roster, which, is much deeper. So that was kind of a natural effect, but it was just a different opportunity that he had in previous seasons coming here to Chicago and really expected to be kind of a guy that was going to help drive the offense for this team. And losing Taylor Hall along with a slew of other guys really, really hurt this Blackhawks offense. And Connor Bedard didn't have as many weapons out there as we were hoping for. But yeah, that's certainly the goal this season. I don't know exactly if Taylor Hall is going to be slotted on that top line with Connor Bedard right out of the gate. It's kind of an interesting top 6 that the Blackhawks have, right? Because they also brought in Bertuzzi and Teuvo Teravainen. Philip Kurashev was someone who found a lot of success with Bedard last year, but I personally don't know if he's ever really going to be a top 6 guy. So there's nothing really set in stone, but quite honestly, that's what I'm looking forward to about this Blackhawks team and why I think Kyle Davidson, even though some people would probably debate the number of forwards that he brought in or even adding TJ Brody on the back end, you can argue maybe they brought in 1 or 2 too many guys, especially with the prospect pool being so deep. However, what's abundantly clear to me is Kyle Davidson wants to make sure this team is competitive in all aspects. And there's going to be battles in training camp, as I just alluded to, on the first line, in the bottom half of the forward group, and then on the defensive side of things too. If you're making this Blackhawks roster on opening night, you're going to have to earn it. And I really do think that's a welcome change of pace compared to where they've been these last couple of years. They just have more depth. So whether it's on the first line or the second line, Taylor Hall is going to be a pivotal part of that top 6. He's going to be playing on the power play. And there is, I think, a pretty good chance that he winds up with Connor Bedard, a left-handed shot, a proven scoring winger who can also play at a pretty high pace, right? It feels like his game would mesh well with Connor Bedard, but regardless if he's there or if he's on the second line, he's going to have to be a big piece of this offense to help them take that next step, right? I firmly believe, based on the moves they've made, they're not going to be dead last in the NHL in goals per game next season, but it's still going to be, I think, a little bit of a challenge for them to kind of get into that top half of the league. Outside of Bedard, They don't really have that like superstar high level talent, but Taylor Hall is one of those guys who's been a proven point producer in this league. So yeah, he's going to have to take advantage of this opportunity and just, quite honestly, for the next step of him in his career, right? All of a sudden, he's coming up into another contract year because 1 year just came by in the blink of an eye. So, yeah, he's going to have to be rocking and rolling right from the get-go. And if he is with Bedard, I really do like that combo. Just really looking forward to seeing Taylor Hall healthy and back on the ice coming off that torn ACL.
Hopefully get his boat license too while he's got the offseason getting his boat license. It's kind of like the similarities also with the Sharks and the Blackhawks kind of continue here, where the Sharks, they have their pieces in the top, but Mike Greer went out of his way to really add some competition in the bottom 6. I think to kind of help so you're not dipping into your AHL pool too quickly and having these guys maybe getting called up too early, or having guys that you expected to be in the AHL to help out. A guy like Ryan Carpenter for the Sharks, who is expected to kind of be the number 1 seed for the Barracuda last year.
Blackhawks legend, baby.
Blackhawks legend. Sharks legend twice over now. But a guy like that who's supposed to kind of help stabilize the AHL, allow to kind of maybe teach some of these young guys in the AHL. He spent the entire season in the NHL because, again, of the depth. And I think it's the same thing. Maybe one too many forwards, so it's going to be a very competitive forward battles for the Sharks, and guys like Thomas Bordeleau, who should be kind of making, like, he's going to have to earn his spot in the NHL over some of these veteran guys. So let's go to the back end, because I think with the kind of big difference here is for the Blackhawks, they have like young defensemen who are like already made an impact. Alex Vlasic, of course, the nephew, to Mark Vlasic from the Sharks. Really, I thought had a really nice season last year, earned his, got a nice contract this offseason. What's, I think, kind of the next step for him as he continues his development?
Oh man, I am so stoked about Alex Vlasic, and it goes back from 2019. I'll never forget where I was when the Hawks picked him 43rd overall in the second round, and he was the guy I wanted. Obviously, we had known the name because of Mark Edwards' success being one of the best defensive defensemen in the NHL, and it's quite honestly mind-boggling that the guy is still playing. Like, I literally cannot wrap my mind
He's
around
got $7 million or 7 million reasons to keep playing.
Yes.
So,
Good point. Good point. But with the role he's played, it's literally a miracle that the guy's still out there. But to see Alex Vlasic turn into this type of player so soon since stepping onto the pro scene, I always felt like he was going to be a top 4 piece for the Blackhawks with his size and the way that he can move for being 6'7" too. He was never a slouch of a skater and has a super long reach. It just felt like he had the mold to be a really good defensive defenseman, but I never expected him to find success immediately like he did last year. I mean, really solidified himself as not only a top pairing defender for the Blackhawks, he was probably better defensively than Seth Jones was last year. Like, he was the best defenseman the Blackhawks had and one of the better defensemen in the entire NHL, even though he wasn't technically considered a rookie because he had played in some NHL games, but it was truly his rookie year. And for him to shine the way that he did and to take on those minutes, especially with a depleted back end, the Blackhawks didn't have a lot of depth there, right? Like, the coaching staff had to be like, Alex, we're going to need you 21 minutes a couple of weeks into the season. It's like, holy jumping. Not a lot of kids would be able to survive that at that early of an age, but he absolutely thrived. And I think what's been really notable to me, JD, is how well his puck game has developed over these last couple of years. And I give credit to the Rockford Ice Hogs and their coaching staff for really putting Alex Vlasic in kind of different situations down in the AHL. Like in the Calder Cup playoffs 2 years ago, he was running their power play. And I'm like, that's not what I envision Alex Vlasic doing, but they did that with purpose so he would get more comfortable in those situations. And it feels like it's really worked wonders for his puck game. And offensively, I think he has more in his arsenal than I ever anticipated. So as far as where he goes from here, it's just kind of rounding out his game now and continuing to prove that it wasn't a 1 year fluke, right? That he can do this year in and year out. I think the biggest thing for him is just continuing to get stronger. You see a picture of him without his shirt on in the locker room. You're like, guy could use a couple cheeseburgers. So that's the biggest thing I would think is in a 6'7" body, you probably want to get him closer to, 220, 225 pounds to kind of round him out. But that's something that's going to come with time. So yeah, it's just take that next step in the offensive game, continue to get better day in and day out. He's going to be on the top pairing with Seth Jones to open up the year. That's kind of the one piece of the Blackhawks roster I think you can put together at this point in time. So yeah, really excited about Alex Vlasic's rapid development here and hoping it's going to be another big time year for him on the back end.
And then Kevin Korchinski, who was one of my favorite prospects in the 2022 draft. And I think a lot of us were a little bit surprised to see him, make the NHL last year, especially with the defenseman. And, he had his ups and downs last year, and that's to be expected, especially with a 19-year-old kid playing a ton of minutes on a bad team. Like, you're going to have those minutes, those moments, right? What do you expect with Korchinski? Could we potentially see him spend some time in the AHL, or do you think he's probably going to spend the entire year in the NHL this year?
Yeah, Korchinski is a really interesting situation. And had he have been eligible to play in the AHL last year, that's absolutely where he would have been. But I was pretty surprised, JD, to see him make the Blackhawks opening night roster. And when that was all going down, there was a lot of debate, obviously. And I mentioned that there were perks to both sides. But the one thing that kind of stood out to me was just how much patience Kyle Davidson has preached. And also looking back at how much Kirby Dach and Adam Boquist really struggled when they didn't get that development time. I really felt like they were going to send Kevin Korchinski back to the WHL. So I was a little bit surprised when they didn't. And yeah, obviously not the first year that he probably wanted to have. It really stunk for him, though. Alex Vlasic was up there on that top pairing with Seth Jones basically all year, which left Kevin Korchinski playing with like Jared Tenorti and, Connor Murphy was only healthy for half the year. So It was really Jacob Megna we got off of waivers, and he basically became
Sharks legend.
another Sharks legend. Exactly, dude. We're just picking off these waiver wire guys, each of our franchises. But like, I'm not kidding. In the second half of the year, that was Kevin Korchinski's defensive partner for most of the year was Jacob Megna. And I give Megna a lot of credit because he came in and performed well. But let's be real. Like, we don't want Kevin Korchinski playing with Jacob Megna. So, yeah, it kind of went a little sour. I think some people forget that he was actually the youngest defenseman in the NHL, too. There was just a lot of talk about Connor Bedard being the youngest player in the NHL. Korchinski was the youngest defenseman in the NHL. I wouldn't be surprised, JD, though, to see him down in Rockford because they do want to be patient. And like I mentioned, had they have had that route last year, that's where he would have been. And quite honestly, Rockford has really worked wonders for them these last few years. Obviously, Alex Vlasic has flourished rather nicely. Ethan Del Mastro in his first year with the Rockford Ice Hogs last year was an AHL All-Star and kind of got put in similar situations as Alex Vlasic to develop his offensive game as a defensive defenseman. I wouldn't be surprised if they utilize the same path with Kevin Korchinski here this year. But what I will say is it's going to depend on training camp. With, like we mentioned with the forwards, there are guys fighting for multiple prospects. Wyatt Kaiser, Kevin Korchinski, Del Mastro, who I just mentioned. Nolan Allen was a first-round pick in 2020 who's on the scene, right? Like, there's kind of only one potential spot for all of those guys. So it's going to be really curious to see kind of who out of that mix winds up making the roster, but would not be surprised whatsoever if Korchinski spends at least half the year down with the Rockford Ice Hogs because they're trying to make that important again, and they're just preaching patience all across the board.
The Korchinski-Levchinov duo is going to be insanely fun.
It is going to be fun. Yeah, I think that could be the top pairing for Rockford right out of the gate, Korchinski-Levchinov, and could be a duo we see on the NHL scene for a long, long time.
Yeah, I think it's, again, the parallels right now between the two. You know, the Sharks kind of, they have Shakir Mukhamadullin, who they acquired the Timo Meier trade, kind of hitting that, like last year of his ELC, going to be fighting for a playoff spot, or for a roster spot, excuse me, not playoffs, but going to be fighting for a roster spot. If not, he's going to be soaking up big minutes at the Barracuda. I think kind of in that same vein of like, everyone kind of joining that timeline at the same time. So yeah, it's, again, so many parallels. I guess that's what happens when your team stake for a while and you draft a lot of high picks. You start to see all the kind of the same things here. So which I guess kind of is going to have to take us to our next segment here, Jack. And
exactly,
who makes the playoffs first?
Yeah, we're going to discuss which of our two franchises make the playoffs first. Maybe the parallels continue. Maybe we envision both of our franchises getting into the playoffs same year. Maybe the parallels end there. Make sure to stay tuned for segment 3. We'll be back in just a moment to discuss which of our two franchises will make the Stanley Cup playoffs first. All right, JD, one of the main reasons why I talked about the Yaroslav Askarov trade being a smashing success for San Jose was because they didn't really have to give up any of their high-end prospects. And I forget who exactly it was that posted this tweet, but it was who the San Jose Sharks now have in their prospect pool moving forward. Macklin Celebrini, Will Smith, Quentin Musty, Yaroslav Askarov, Sam Dickinson, William Eklund, not to mention Philip Biested, Igor Chernyshov, and at least one pick in the first round and second round each of the next 3 years, setting up San Jose quite nicely moving forward. But I'm interested in kind of how you see the San Jose Sharks path shaping out these next couple of years. I think as hosts of teams that have been bottom feeders for quite a while now, we've probably envisioned or mapped out exactly how we think our team's getting back to the glory days, hopefully, is gone. So I'm curious to see how, in your mind, you've kind of shaped it out for San Jose.
I think 3 years is kind of a realistic expectation for the Sharks to make it to the playoffs. And I think too, especially when you go through these type of rebuilds, right? Something I've preached on my show is you want to build sustainable success, right? You don't want to be that flash in the pan team that kind of like the Kraken did a couple years ago, where they make the playoffs, they get to the second round, and then you're not able to build on it, right? You kind of want to maybe like the Colorado approach, where it's like, okay, we make the playoffs, then we kind of move further and further until we finally, are able to win the whole thing. Right, that's sustainable success. And I think for the Sharks, the next couple seasons will be about the growth of your prospects and having these guys kind of make it into the NHL and continue their development and growth during that time, and starting to add some of these guys that you mentioned, like Sam Dickinson's and your Quentin Mustees. The fun thing about that list is everybody you named except for Chernyshov is first round picks. Like it's insane that I could just name first round picks. But so I think for the Sharks, like adding those pieces and then their cap situation also, I mean, this was one of the worst cap situations a couple years ago. And now you look at it and you can see the light at the end of the tunnel where you're getting out of these contracts, right? The Brent Burns contract will be off the books this season. I know they're still retaining a little bit of money on Carlson and Hurdle, but it's like $1 million. Like it's not that big of a deal instead of the $11.5 million that was the Carlson one, and Tomas Hurdles, which was over $8 million. Vlasic's contract comes off the books right in time when you have to start to think we have to pay William Eklund. Logan Couture, who we don't know if he'll ever play again. You know, he's got a couple years left on his, but you're seeing Mike Grier kind of clean these contracts out and getting ready to be able to be a competitive team again. So I fully expect this year to have its kind of, you know, it's going to have its lumps and stuff as you have 18 and 19-year-old kids trying to figure out what to do. But I think 3 years from now is when you can really, especially if everyone progresses the way we expect, with a lot of cap space, you're going to have a young guys kind of starting to enter their prime. I think that's when you can kind of start to enter that competitive window of where playoffs should be the expectation, and then start to win some rounds and grow this thing. So yeah, that's kind of the timeline I'm looking at, especially if you look at the Pacific, right? Where we don't know with Edmonton, what's going on with them, especially when you have the Draisaitl question that's be hanging over them. Vegas is a team that kind of feels like that 2018-19 Sharks team that could be on the verge of a collapse here really soon. The Kings are kind of stuck in being that first round type of team. I know the Ducks are on their way up here, but there's going to be, I think, some big changes in the Pacific here really, really soon. I think you look at the Central, there's probably going to be a lot of the same kind of beats here, right?
Yeah, I feel like the Central, I mean, even Colorado next year, Mikko Rantanen potentially. I mean, they're going to have to figure out something to do with him. There's still all the questions around Gabriel Landeskog. And other than Colorado, I feel like the Central Division, at least the teams who have been up there for the last couple of years, Dallas mostly, I'm just not as comfortable or as, I don't feel as, what is it?
Breaking Chicago Blackhawks news. Brossoit underwent meniscus repair surgery. This is from Frank Cervalli. Out 5 to 7 weeks, which puts him back late of the training camp or beginning of regular season. Would you like one gently used VTech Vantage?
Holy shit! You just scared me so hard. I apologize for the for my language there, but
we'll bleep that out. But I'm keeping that in. That's too good.
Oh my god! You just almost gave me a heart attack because, funny enough, topic of conversation that I just had on my podcast 2 days ago was top offseason moves. My favorite one was Laurent Brossoit. So you just almost gave me a mini heart attack because that meant Arvid Soderblom was going to have to be the backup again, which I don't know if Blackhawks fans were going to be able to go through that. So fortunately,
whenever I was watching Blackhawks games last year and I saw he was starting, I was just like, oh no, because I watched way too many Blackhawks games last year and rooting for them to win Blackhawks games. Yeah, and I was just like, oh, they got no chance. You felt like you had no chance tonight when he started.
Right.
So anyway.
I don't think anyone can ever question your San Jose Sharks fandom again based on you watching the dreadful Chicago Blackhawks to cheer them on to win games. You are truly a sicko.
Between the Sharks, the Barracuda, who didn't even make the playoffs in the AHL, the Blackhawks. At least I got to watch BC a lot. That was like my one, your piece of dessert to I get to watch Will Smith and Ryan Gauthier and all these fun guys do cool stuff. Yeah. So.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, thank goodness it sounds like it's only short term for Laurent Brossoit because I really believe this Blackhawks team is going to need them. But getting back to our main segment 3 conversation here, JD. I feel like the Blackhawks, it's going to be interesting for them. I feel like next year's free agency is what's going to make or break to me whether they can be a playoff team next season because they're not ready for that this year. I think they're going to be a harder team to play against. They're a more veteran, scrappy, and deeper group. I still don't see them having the upside to get to the Stanley Cup playoffs, but they're going to still have a lot of money to spend. And we know about that 2025 free agent class. Obviously, all the players who are projected to hit the market aren't going to end up there, but you still feel like there are going to be some pretty notable names, maybe Mikko Rantanen, maybe Leon Draisaitl, and boy, I feel like both of those guys would be great options for the Blackhawks alongside Connor Bedard, and feels like it could be an enticing spot for them to potentially go should they hit the market. So I feel like next year's free agency is really what's going to make or break this Blackhawks team in terms of them getting to that playoff level in 2025, 2026. I do still ultimately feel like that's a little bit of a reach. And because they are preaching patience and because only a couple of their high-end prospects will be on the scene, maybe that's a little far-fetched. And 2026, 2027 could be more realistic when you're kind of thinking as well. But I wouldn't put out 2025, 26 being a possibility for the Blackhawks because I do think the pieces that they've brought in, a couple of guys on multiple year deals, Bertuzzi, Teravainen are going to be around, Nick Foligno still going to be there, TJ Brody on the back end, right? And the Blackhawks still should have some pretty good money to spend. So I feel like it'll be a decent-ish core. Again, it's going to make or break on what type of free agents they bring in. Because if they get a true top line guy to go play with Connor Bedard, and then you can kind of bump some of the other guys down the lineup a little bit, I think the Blackhawks could be a sneaky team in 2025, 26. But I'm with you, more than likely 26, 27 is probably when this thing is going to happen. I know that's not what Blackhawks fans want to hear, or Sharks fans for that matter, because I'm sure their patience have been tested at this point in time. But I do think also the Central Division with the changing of the tides could kind of work in the Blackhawks' favor should they make the playoffs next year. I really feel like the future of the Central is a bigger question mark than it's been for quite some time. And I feel like it could be that era where Chicago, Nashville, based on the moves that they just made, and maybe Utah, who, if they can ever figure out how to put all their prospects together and actually have a good NHL team, feels like it would be now's the time. So yeah, I kind of feel the same way how you feel about the West with San Jose right now. It feels like it could be there for the Blackhawks. The one thing, what do you feel about, so in terms of the Sharks, last question I have for you on this topic, JD, is what would be the leap you'd want? I know we don't know what the results of this year are going to be, but what kind of leap would you want to see San Jose take in the 2025, 2026 season when you have a couple of the more young guys onto the scene? Like what kind of year do you think they'll have leading into that year that you're trying to get into the playoffs is kind of what I'm asking.
I kind of always like the way I look at rebuilds, and especially now, I think you and I are kind of well versed in like the process and stuff of like, you have like your bottom feeders or your tanking teams like the Sharks and the Blackhawks are now, and then like kind of moving from that to like that fun frisky phase, kind of like how the Red Wings have been like the last couple seasons, where they're getting closer, maybe not make the playoffs, but you're making things interesting at least until like the new year or the trade deadline, where I think that's kind of that next step. And that's kind of what I'll be looking for, especially with the Sharks. They're going to have some cap space if they want to try to add some free agents. I still think Mike Grier is going to be, he's drafted all these guys. He's going to want these guys to kind of be the leaders of it, but adding smart free agents to help. And I think the blue line is going to be a big thing for Mike Grier, to continue to add pieces that fit the timeline there. But again, can you go from a bottom feeder to that fun, frisky team where it's like, okay, I can see, and then everyone's talking about you in the offseason of like, oh yeah, this team's ready to take the leap to be that next playoff team. We kind of saw it from the Devils a couple years ago before they made the playoffs, where you see all these young guys. Like I said, the Red Wings, kind of that fun, frisky team last year. Yeah, the Sabres 2 years ago, where it was like they just missed the playoffs, like being that team where you're just, there's actual excitement and a reason to want to watch night in, night out, instead of just going on Tankathon every 6 times a day.
Instead of constantly wanting to rip your hair out day in and day out. Well, JD, throughout this episode, we've spoken about parallels and the similarities between these two teams. I think it would be very fitting if these two teams became the next two powerhouses of the Western Conference based on the prospect pools and the talents that they've accumulated over these next couple of years. I think it would be fitting for them to become a good rivalry once again, and could even be starting with the Blackhawks home opener this year. First game at the United Center, Macklin Celebrini and the Sharks taking on Connor Bedard and the Chicago Blackhawks. Feels like that's going to be a matchup we're going to be seeing for years to come, my friend.
Oh, I cannot wait. Can you imagine you've had plenty of but yeah, a Sharks player up there for once, not named Joe Thornton. Yeah, it's going to be, cannot wait, my friend. It'll be, and you know what? I'm going to be super obnoxious when the Sharks are good. I think I deserve it.
You absolutely do. You absolutely do. And I'm going to be just as obnoxious when the Blackhawks get back to that level once again. But JD, for all my Blackhawks listeners out there that want to follow along with Macklin Celebrini and the exciting San Jose Sharks over these next few years, before we become those rivals in the Western Conference, please let them know where they can find you in the show.
Of course, you can follow the show wherever you get podcasts, and you can watch on YouTube as well. You can follow the show on social media, on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole.
Absolutely. And for me, if anyone wants to check me out on the San Jose Sharks side of things, you can find me on X, my personal account at Jack Bushman 2. Locked On Blackhawks for free wherever you get your podcasts, and the show's page, capital L, capital O, _ Blackhawks on X. JD, a lot of fun as always. I know we ran a little long here, but it's always a lot of fun when we get together for these chats, and looking forward to having one with you in the not so distant future, maybe even before that home opener for the Blackhawks in October against the Sharks.
Sounds good, buddy.
Awesome. Well, thank you again to everyone who tuned in. Until next time, we'll see you on the next episode of Locked On Blackhawks and Locked On Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.